The wind curled off the shivering sea and swooped low over Winterfell's rugged walls, carrying with it a sting of salt and distant storms. In the dim half-light before dawn, Jon Snow stood alone upon the battlements, cloak snapping around his legs like a banner of black. Below, the castle breathed its slow morning sighs. Sparks in the smithy, a restless hound's bark, the soft thump of stable doors. But up here the world felt suspended, quiet enough that Jon could almost taste the hush of coming change on the back of his tongue. He pressed gloved fingers to the frost-rimmed stone. Somewhere beyond those gray horizons, beyond the crumbling towers of Moat Cailin and the far forests of the Neck, there was Dragonstone, an island of black glass and smoking memories, seat of the old dragons. He had known the name since childhood, Lord Stark's tales, Maester Luwin's maps, but it had always been a storybook place, safe in parchment distance. Now, with Lord Eddard's summons echoing in his thoughts, Dragonstone felt suddenly real, like flint struck to tinder. A raven had arrived 3 days past, sealed with wax the silvery blue of the hand of the king. Its words were sparse, its tone clipped. Lord Stark to sail south within a fortnight, taking with him a retinue smaller than custom allowed. Jon was to accompany the maester, ostensibly to study the ancient libraries that clung like barnacles to Dragonstone's volcanic flanks. Robb would remain to shoulder Winterfell's weight. Bran, still small, had stared wide-eyed at the notion of dragons sleeping beneath stone, while Arya, wolf-bright, had begged to hide in Jon's baggage. Only Catelyn's silence had cut sharper than the north wind, a silence that told Jon Snow exactly how tenuous his place remained in this house of wolves. He exhaled, breath ghosting. Below, the gods' wood pool lay steel-still, pale as moonlit glass. Somewhere in those crimson leaves, he imagined the old gods whispering, weaving threads he could not see. Far to the east of Winterfell snows, Daenerys Targaryen watched black water slap against a blacker shore. Dragonstone rose before her like something broken loose from the world's first nightmare. A jagged silhouette bristling with gargoyles and twisted towers, each spire shaped in the memory of a dragon's limb or fang. Behind her on the narrow galley's deck, Viserys paced in frantic little lines, pale hair streaming, every footfall a spark of impatience against the salt-wet planks. "Remember," her brother hissed, though the sailors pretended they could not hear. "When we set foot upon our birthright, you will keep your head bowed and your tongue sheathed. Stannis Baratheon is no friend, but here." His hand swept at the looming castle. "Here we breathe the air that belongs to our blood. One day soon, dragons will soar above these walls again, and all Westeros will kneel." Daenerys said nothing. She clutched the rail and felt the ship's timbers quiver beneath the sea's slow heartbeat. Years spent in exile, Illyrio's perfumed halls and pentos, the cracked tiles of the free cities, had taught her to seal her fear behind a mask of stillness. Yet as Dragonstone climbed higher in her vision, fear gave way to something stranger. A note of homesickness for a place she had never known, a pull like moon-dragged tides tugging at bone. She wondered if her father's ghost haunted those passages, or if her mother's final cries still lingered in the stones. She wondered, too, what sort of man had agreed to harbor the last dragon seeds in secret. Stannis Baratheon, they said, was iron-bound in duty and cold as the sea in winter. But what did duty want with a banished girl and her ragged brother? What price would be asked? Viserys spoke of alliance, but alliances forged in shadow always left scars. The hull scraped ashore with a sigh. Lantern light bobbed across the surf-slick rocks. Daenerys gathered her cloak about her shoulders, thin, but dyed a quiet violet, and followed Viserys into the salt-bitten dark. The road south unraveled beneath Jon Snow like a scroll of endless gray. At White Harbor they boarded the Carrack Swift to cross the Bight. The sea was restless beneath storm-shredded skies, and gulls screamed overhead like ghosts denied the shore. Jon spent long hours amidships with Maester Luwin, translating Valyrian inscriptions until the parchment blurred. At night he lay in a narrow berth listening to the creak of timbers, thinking of Robb's laughter echoing in Winterfell's hall, of Ghost pacing the kennels, of a face he had never seen yet dreamed he might one day call mother. When at last Dragonstone's silhouette breached the horizon, Jon felt the deck tilt with something other than the sea's sway. Black cliffs jutted like broken spears. Smoke curled from vents in the rock, sulphurous and faintly luminous against the dusk. The castle above was a frozen storm, all barbs and angles. Jon wondered what monsters the Valyrians had needed protection from to raise such a fortress. A lean boat conveyed them ashore. Ser Davos Seaworth, Stannis's grizzled envoy, met them on the basalt quay. His missing fingertips did little to blunt the warmth in his one good smile. "The Lord of Dragonstone bids you welcome," Davos said, voice like gravel softened by tide. "Rooms are prepared. The libraries you seek, Maester, lie in the belly of the mountain, though some shelves have not felt a candle's breath in a century." Jon bowed as Lord Stark introduced him. Davos's eyes lingered, curious, on the direwolf stitched white upon Jon's sable cloak. "A snow far from the snows," he mused before leading them up a stair cut into the cliff, torches guttering in the wind. Inside, Dragonstone breathed heat. Air tasted of soot and deep hearth fires, and everywhere stone dragons crouched with wings half spread, as though ready to leap the moment no living gaze pinned them. Jon felt the weight of their stares prickling his skin. Yet beneath that unease there was wonder, too, for the walls were inlaid with shimmering veins of obsidian that caught the torchlight and fractured it into colors Winterfell's northern night had never shown him. They supped that evening in a hall narrow as a sword's edge, its high windows latticed with black iron. Stannis Baratheon sat at the high table's midpoint, balding pate, beard trimmed close, gray eyes that burned without visible flame. To his right sat his daughter Shireen, shy behind her book. To his left, Jon's gaze paused. A young woman of perhaps 16 winters sat cloaked in twilight blue, silver-white hair falling soft around a face too delicate to be entirely of this stern place. Her hands, folded carefully on her lap, were small and pale. A single thin chain of gold rested at her throat. She spoke rarely, but when she did the words carried an accent Jon had only read on brittle scrolls. A softened lilt, like wind over warm sand. Viserys Targaryen sat beside her. Restless shoulders, feverish lilac eyes that darted, weighed, dismissed. Stannis's own men kept a watchful distance from him, as though bitten before. Jon felt the first spark of something unnamed flicker beneath his ribs. He did not yet know that spark's price, or the paths it would forge through frost and flame. He only knew the hall seemed suddenly narrower, the air sharper, as though the whole castle leaned in to listen. Daenerys felt the young Northman's gaze, not a leer, nor the sharpened hunger she had learned to dread in Illyrio's courts, but a steady, quiet, steady, as though he compared her to some distant memory of snow and starlight. When their eyes met across the candles, Daenerys looked quickly away, cheeks warming. She wondered if he knew what it was to belong nowhere, to carry histories one scarcely believed. After the meal, Stannis excused himself with curt goodnights, and the hall emptied into side corridors. Viserys vanished in pursuit of the hand, no doubt to talk of crowns and iron chairs, while servants led Daenerys toward chambers in the Sea Dragon Tower. She walked the passages alone, shadows breathing like beasts beyond the sconces. Yet as she rounded a bend near an arched window, footsteps echoed behind. "Princess!" The voice was soft, northern, brushed with caution. She turned. Jon Snow stood a respectful pace away. Up close, she saw the flecks of gray in his dark eyes, stone and storm clouds, and the single white direwolf stitched on his breast. "Forgive me," he said. "I fear I stared at supper. I meant no discourtesy." "You stared?" Daenerys replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Like a man who sees ghosts. Perhaps I did." He hesitated, then offered a half-smile that seemed rare upon his mouth. "Winterfell's maester says Dragonstone's ghosts roam freely. I wish to be certain you were not one." She almost smiled in return. "And what verdict did you reach?" "That you are a very real. More real than most things here, if that makes sense." He flushed, glancing aside. "I have never met a princess. I have never met a Snow," she said before thinking. His brows rose, and heat flooded her face. "I mean, pardon, the name is unusual." "It is," Jon admitted. "A bastard's name in the north." Something gentle passed through his tone, as though he named a familiar ache rather than an apology. Daenerys thought of her own names: Stormborn, the Last Dragon, the Silver Queen. Names that felt like robes far too rich for the frightened child beneath. "Then we share a certain displacement." Jon nodded, understanding without her needing to carve it in words. Torchlight limned the ridges of a stone dragon's jaw above them. Outside, waves shattered themselves on the cliffs. The hall smelled of salt and smoke and damp velvet. "I should let you rest," Jon said. "The stairs are steep, and the towers twist like knots. It is easy to lose oneself." "It is easy to be lost anywhere," Daenerys murmured. She caught herself then, offered him a small formal incline of her head, the sort Viserys insisted upon. "Good night, Jon Snow." He bowed and turned away. Only after he vanished into torch shadow did Daenerys realize she had used his name without title, and that he had spoken hers likewise, and that some fragile thread now stretched between them, humming. Days unfolded like parchment corners eased apart. Storm clouds encircled Dragonstone, trapping sea skies of bruised purple above the turrets. Maester Luwin vanished for long stretches into vaults of scrollwork, delighted as a raven amid shining baubles. Lord Stark conferred with Stannis behind doors barred to servants. Viserys paced and schemed, but found Stannis immovable as the stone he ruled, and so sought sailors instead, weaving tales of a golden crown that waited only the right moment to descend. Through it all, Jon and Daenerys crossed paths like flint and steel, sparks in the dark, brief and bright, a gallery lined with dusty dragon skulls, a terrace overlooking the narrow sea, where gulls wheeled against storm-whipped surf. Words grew between them, cautious at first, then more certain. Talk of Winterfell's wolves and the children's tales old Nan spun, of Cartha's perfumed streets and the dancing sands of Lazer. Jon spoke of a brother who smiled like the dawn and a sister who shot arrows from the stable roof. Daenerys spoke of a brother who dreamed with open eyes and woke with knives in his smile. They laughed, quietly, at mutual bewilderments. Jon's first taste of spiced wine that stung like pepper, Daenerys's tentative curiosity about snow. Real snow, drifting white and soft as ash. In those moments, the looming storm of throne and duty retreated, and they were simply two young souls adrift in an older tide. But tides turn, and dragons wake. On the 8th day, the War Council met in the Stone Drum, torches guttering like dying stars. Jon stood behind Lord Stark's chair, silent, observing. Stannis outlined a threat grown in the east, the Dothraki Khalasar swelling around Khal Drogo, whispers of Illyrio Mopatis plotting alliances, the unsullied drilling in Astapor's sun-baked squares. Across the narrow sea, King Robert's throne tottered on debts and wine. "You speak of smoke on a horizon half the world away," Lord Stark said, voice quiet but iron hard. "The realm will not muster armies on rumor." "Rumor?" Stannis' hand slammed the table. "Viserys Targaryen wants ships. Sells word captains listen. Gold flows from Pentos pockets to old Volantis docks. Scouts talk of wyverns for sale in Sithorios, poor cousins to dragons, yet dragons enough for men without dragons. A spark can ignite a field of dry wheat, Stark. And so you play host to the spark," Ned Stark observed. Stannis' eyes cooled. "Better to keep embers where I can stamp them than let them slip through cracks to the wind." He glanced at Davos. "Viserys is tethered here by courtesy, by unseen chains. Let the wolf's son judge. Is my caution folly?" Jon started. The table's regard turned on him. Lords, knights, the taciturn master of ships. He felt the weight anew of being a Snow among trueborn names. Yet Daenerys, seated beside Viserys and flanked by a pair of Queen's men, looked at Jon with an expression close to a plea. He found words in that look. "Caution is wise," Jon said steadily, "but fear breeds enemies faster than swords. A dragon in chains grows stronger in legend. Sometimes a door left ajar lets heat breathe out before it burns." The chamber stilled. Stannis studied him like a mason mapping faults in granite. Then, to everyone's shock, the Lord of Dragonstone gave a single-clipped nod, acknowledgement, perhaps, of some truth hammered flat. Viserys, however, rose in a fury. Chains? Is that what you call this hospitality? A lordling bastard lectures on caution, while my birthright rusts beneath us. Spittle flecked his lips. Guards bristled. Ser Davos eased a hand toward his knife hilt more in worry than threat. Across the table, Daenerys' cheeks paled. Lord Stark's voice cut the tumult. My son spoke out of turn. He will remember his place. Jon bowed, pulse thundering. Viserys' fit subsided into mutters about treachery and fools. Stannis closed the council with icy finality. Yet as chairs scraped and lords filed out, Jon felt a bruise of regret swelling inside. He had tried to temper fear, not inflame it. He left by a side passage, seeking cold air. Torches trembled overhead, their flames thin and wary. Rounding a corner, he found Daenerys waiting, cloak drawn tight. You spoke bravely, she whispered. Viserys sees insult in every shadow. I meant no insult, Jon said. Only, he exhaled, I do not like seeing you shackled by another's fury. A flicker of something passed behind her eyes. Surprise, gratitude, grief. Neither do I, she said, barely audible. But chains are often invisible until they clink. Thunder rumbled beyond stone. Jon reached, hesitating, then set a hand on her arm. Light as snowfall, yet enough that she shivered. If you ever need a friend. He left the offer unfinished. Words felt brittle things. Daenerys looked at his hand, then met his gaze. Perhaps I already have one, she said, voice steadier than his heartbeat. She slid her arm free, but not harshly. Stay safe, Jon Snow. He watched her disappear down the passage, torchlight cresting silver hair like a halo. In the silence that followed, he felt the world shift, an inexorable turning, like constellations sliding around a new North Star. Night fell in sheets of rain. Jon lay sleepless, images flickering. A Dragonstone courtyard where torches burned blue-green in the rain, Daenerys spinning beneath them, unchained. Ghosts' distant howl in a snow-buried forest. A crown melting upon stone. He rose, paced, returned to bed, rose again. At last, unable to bear the confines, he wrapped himself in a cloak and slipped from his chamber. The corridor beyond was empty save for gargoyles drooling water. He climbed a stair spiraling toward the Windworm Tower, where he had glimpsed an open terrace earlier. At the top, an iron-bound door yielded to his push. Wind slapped him, rain cold as knives. Yet the open sky felt necessary. Jon stepped onto the battlement walk. Lightning spidered across the clouds, illuminating Dragonstone spines and the foaming sea below. He inhaled salt and sulfur, let the storm's fury scrub his thoughts raw. A sound reached him, a sob, quickly stifled. Jon turned. Daenerys knelt beside a stone wyvern, cloak-soaked, hair plastered to her cheeks. In her hands lay an egg the color of smoldering embers, deep red shot with veins of black. One of 3 gifted by Illyrio, Jon had overheard, keepsakes of a lost empire. She held it like a child holds a wounded bird, and tears streaked tracks through rain on her face. Princess, he said, gentle. She flinched, but did not hide her grief. I thought to feel strength here, she said, voice breaking, to stand where my ancestors hatched fire and command fleets. But I feel small, and Viserys, he will burn everything trying to prove himself. I fear the flames may take me with him. Jon approached, knelt so they were level. Rain pooled in the hollows of the stone. I have no dragons, he said. I have no name even my father may claim, but I have seen good men drown in doubt. It is not birth that keeps them afloat, it is choice. You can choose the tide you ride. She looked at him, and something fragile shone through the wet. Hope, maybe. And if I choose wrong? Then choose again, Jon said. He placed a hand over hers on the egg's shell. Heat pulsed faintly beneath the scales, or perhaps it was only shared warmth through rain-chilled skin. The world is not forged in a single strike. Thunder crashed, but neither flinched. In that moment, the storm swirled around them like a cloak, and the two young souls, bastard wolf and dragon exile, found shelter in each other's resolve. At dawn, the narrow sea lay calm, as though the night's fury were rumor, yet Dragonstone buzzed with unrest. Viserys had been discovered slinking through the armory, demanding swordsmen pledge loyalty to a crown unseen. He was confined to chambers near the Sea Dragon Tower, barred and guarded. Daenerys, half-drenched and shivering, was escorted to her rooms before sunrise. Whispers of a meeting on the terrace brushed away. Lord Stark announced their departure. King Robert's summons could no longer be delayed. Maester Luwin packed inkpots and scrolls, lamenting shelves yet unstudied. Jon's heart twisted. Departure meant distance. Distance meant losing the fragile strand he had only begun to trace. He sought Daenerys in the courtyard as steeds were saddled. She emerged flanked by guards, Viserys nowhere to be seen. When their eyes met, the bustle fell away. "Must you leave so soon?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "The North calls," Jon answered. "But I—" His throat closed around words unformed. He pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. Within lay a direwolf carved of white weirwood, barely larger than a thumb. "For luck," he managed, "and to remember that choices can be remade." Daenerys's fingers closed, trembling, around the wolf. "Thank you, Jon Snow." She rose on her toes, not bold but certain, and brushed her lips to his cheek. Warmth bloomed through him, swift as sunrise. "May the gods old and new keep you." Before he could respond, Stannis' steward called her away. Jon watched her disappear into the tower of the Sea Dragon, wolf token clasped to her breast. The gale that filled Swift's sails hours later felt colder than any wind north of the Wall. Years would pass before war's hammer struck Westeros, before ravens screamed of kings in the north and dragons reborn. Yet in hidden places, beneath glass candles and in frozen crypts, two stories began to weave a single thread, spun from frost and flame. Jon Snow rode north with ghosts for company, unaware that each step carried him closer to a destiny forged that storm-lashed night. Daenerys Targaryen traced a thumb over white weirwood, dreaming of snow that did not burn, of a wolf's steady gaze in shadows, of doors left ajar. Far below Dragonstone, in tunnels laced with heat, 3 eggs stirred in their stone dreams. One pulsed red, like a coal awaiting breath. Above, clouds gathered, and the world held its breath, waiting for the moment when sparks born of bond would ignite fire enough to change kingdoms. The tide draws out only to return. Choices made and remade will meet again upon another shore, where dragonfire meets northern snow, and the song that begins in silence will one day thunder across all realms of men. Winterfell welcomed its son like stone greeting snow, without fanfare, without surprise, yet with a deep rightness Jon felt beneath every footstep. The drawbridge clanked into place. Gates yawned black. The familiar musk of straw, smoke, and pine sap drifted beneath the sharper tang of horse sweat. Robb met him in the yard with that wide wolf grin. Jon had missed more than sunrise in winter, and for a moment the bleakness of parting from Dragonstone eased. They clasped forearms in the northern fashion. Robb had grown broader in the months Jon spent at sea, muscle underneath the same auburn curls. But a new weight shadowed his eyes, as though every decision he made bore the stamp of Winterfell's defense. Bran scampered about Ghost's legs with youthful wonder. Arya leapt from a bale of hay to land cat-like atop Jon's chest, and Rickon screeched joy and terror in equal measure when Ghost nuzzled him. Sansa offered a curtsy worthy of a queen, her red hair pinned with fresh-rolled patience. Yet beneath the swirl of familial noise Jon sensed Lady Catelyn's gaze from the great keep's balcony. Composed, polite, but cool as a frost-kissed blade. He returned a nod, nothing more, and knew that was all they could offer each other. Inside the great hall, fires roared their welcome. Benjen Stark, just returned from an absence on the Wall, embraced his nephew. Uncle Benjen's presence stirred the Watch's black cloak like a banner of possibility. Talk of wildling raids and ranger patrols peppered supper, yet each time the conversation turned toward the south, toward Dragonstone, the Baratheon court, or the Targaryen wards, Lord Eddard steered it gently back to local concerns. Harvest yields, holdfast repairs, the upcoming barrow blessings before winter's onset. It was not subtle, but it was effective, and Jon grasped that secrecy sat heavy in his father's study, awaiting candlelit measures. Long after the feast fires dwindled, Jon walked ghost beneath the moon-skeined branches of the godswood. The pool mirrored constellations, broken only by the direwolf's silent lap at still water. Jon knelt at the weirwood's white roots and closed his eyes. Images flickered. Daenerys's pale hair strewn by rain, her hands cupped around a dragon's egg, the tremor in her voice when she asked whether choices could be remade. He whispered her name to the red leaves. The old gods listened or not. Either way, the weight in his chest eased. Across leagues of sea, Dragonstone's courtyard bristled with crossbowmen drilling under lantern light. Daenerys watched from an arched window, jaw set. Since Viserys' confinement, Stannis had tightened the garrison. Idle men brewed mutiny, he claimed, and discipline dulled rebellion's edge. The truth, Daenerys suspected, lay deeper. Stannis feared the storm within Viserys as much as storms beyond his walls. Viserys himself paced like a caged manticore in his chambers, railing at closed doors and plotting fever-hot letters to mercenary captains. Only Daenerys was permitted to visit, and even then only under guard. She brought him meals, tidings of the realm, and soft words to soothe vengeance, yet each meeting left her raw. His fury stank of desperation now, wild and unfocused. Illyrio's gold had dwindled. Pentos sent no more ships. They were guests, but also prisoners, cushioned by courtesy's silks. And she found her feet wandering the library Stannis had begrudged her, tracing spines of tomes that sang with Valyrian steel's lost mysteries. There she met Shireen, sweet, scar-cheeked, voice bright as dawn on cracked stone. Together they read tales of dragons that slept in volcano hearts, of kings who wielded fire as sword and shield. Shireen, gentle conspirator, taught Daenerys the Citadel cipher for Raven scrolls and the ink recipe that shimmered silver when dry. When Daenerys dreamed, she dreamt of winter wolves. Moon after moon slid across the narrow sea. Summer deepened. The stark words, "Winter is coming," echoed through northern forests as leaves began their first restless whisper of gold. One dusk, Uncle Benjen found Jon sharpening Longclaw's blunted cousin in the armory. Iron filings dusted the air like dull snow. Benjen spoke of the wall's need for men, honorable men who had seen the world beyond northern borders. With Robb soon to shoulder lordship and Bran's injury still a phantom fear, though the boy climbed turrets like a squirrel, Jon's path narrowed. The wall beckoned with frigid promise. 2 weeks later, Lord Eddard stood beneath Winterfell's gatehouse in the hush before dawn. He clasped Jon's forearm. "The wall's vows will make a man of you," Ned said, voice thick. "But you were a man already, Jon. Remember you carry stark honor, whatever your name." Ghost pressed against Jon's thigh, red eyes steady. Robb embraced him with a grin too bright to last. Arya punched his shoulder so her tears would not gather, and Sansa offered a little smile, half terrified, half proud. Bran clung to his leg, demanding stories of giants. Jon promised letters. Promises were easy when the world seemed big enough to hold them. The small party, Jon, Benjen, and half a dozen recruits, rode hard for the King's Road. Autumn suns blazed gold. Nights bit cold. Jon let the rhythm of hooves dull the ache of parting. Yet each campfire, when others slept, he withdrew silver quill and parchment Shireen had given him and wrote messages he had no raven to carry. "My Lady of Dragonstone," he would start, then strike the salutation, fearing its boldness. "Princess," then Daenerys, then simply a friend across water. He wrote of bark and frost and the purple hush before sunrise. He folded the pages, sealed them blank, and tucked them beneath wool in his saddlebag, as though distance could be bridged by intention alone. On Dragonstone, Daenerys traced a fingertip across the direwolf carving's fine grain. Each night she set the talisman upon her bedside table, white wood glowing faintly in moonlight. She imagined Jon's journey north, the chill that would kiss his cheeks, the vast sky above white wilderness. She wondered if ravens could cross such emptiness. She penned letters on Shireen's shimmering ink, full of questions, of confessions, of half-remembered jokes about snow that did not burn, and concealed them beneath a loose floorboard. No messenger was safe, but secrets kept words alive until opportunity knocked. Opportunity came with the bastard of Bolton. News arrived by Raven. Lord Roose Bolton's acknowledged son, Ramsay Snow, had raided Torrens Square under cloak of truce, taking hostages for ransom. Lord Stark prepared riders. In the shuffle of banners and outrage, ravens blurred through sky like black hail. One such raven bore a plain scroll to Dragonstone, requesting Stannis' counsel on vassal discipline. The missive's bearer, a Night's Watch black brother named Darion, would sail the coast aboard a supply cog to Eastwatch, stopping briefly by Dragonstone's harbor for tar and tackle repairs. Stannis dismissed the journey as mundane. Daenerys saw a crack in stone. She found Ser Davos inspecting cargo at the quay. Barrels of salted cod, coils of rope, nets stiff with brine. The sea smelled of kelp and possibility. Ser Davos, she said, cloak whipping. Might a small note accompany the supplies north? A childhood friend resides at Winterfell's court. I have little chance to write. She produced a coin, old Valyrian silver twinned with dragon heads. For postage, Davos eyed the coin as though it stung. Not necessary, princess. A letter weighs nothing. Kindness warmed his weather-creased features. Give it here. Her fingers trembled as she passed him a scroll sealed in plain wax. Inside lay words to Jon. I will see your dogs of winter and raise you dragons yet unborn. I choose every tide anew. The cog sailed on a moonless tide. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood atop the wall, breath pluming in the minus cold. Immensity humbled him. Ice stretching east to sunrise, west to play at devouring the sun itself. Nights at the top of the world vibrated with a silence so utter that even memories whispered. Yet duty filled the space. Rangers drilled. Both brothers learned to trust backs and blades. Jon found solace in routine. Dawn sword practice, midday drills, afternoon archery, evenings at the library with Maester Aemon whose blind eyes saw through time. Ghost trotted beside him, silent sentinel, a patch of living snow amid endless white. When Darion's cog docked at Eastwatch, winter storms still distant, messages were sorted by torchlight. Jon leafed through a stack addressed to Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, to Steward Bowen Marsh, to Ranger Ser Jeremy Ricker. When no more remained, he shrugged, a dull, resigned gesture, and turned to leave. Darion called, "Hold, Stark's bastard. Nearly missed this one." He held out a plain-sealed scroll. Jon broke wax. Silver ink shimmered in lamplight. He read, then read again, disbelieving. I choose every tide anew. After midnight, he knelt before parchment, quill poised. Words spilled. The wall is cold, but not colder than the absence of your voice. I train each dawn beneath ice-ghost stars and imagine dragonfire warming my blade. I choose. G. Weeks later, the raven's wings beat into Dragonstone's rookery. Daenerys pressed the page to her lips. Winter's bite bled through ink wrought beyond the world's edge, and she thrilled to it. Snow fell early upon the wall that year, thin, dry, hissing across ramparts. Jon welcomed it like a cloak returned. Training intensified. Benjen ranged beyond the shadows, pursuing rumor of whites. 3 days before Long Night Eve, news returned on a half-frozen horse. Benjen Stark missing. Patrol vanished near the haunted forest's treeline. Search parties failed. Grief struck like frostbite, first numbing, then deep agonizing burn. Jon sought solace in letters to Daenerys, pouring rage at a sky he could not wound. Her replies came, slower, but no less bright. Nuggets of dragon lore, encouragement to hold the line, assurances that even ashes may birth flame anew. Across the sea, Viserys' restlessness hardened into cunning. Spending long nights studying accounts of the Shadowlands, he learned of a Sell-Sail fleet anchored off Lys, captained by a man they called the Red Kraken. Gold could buy loyalty, but promises of dragon-forged glory bought zeal. Viserys bartered secrets, Stannis' garrison numbers, the hidden powder stores beneath the stone drum, in exchange for passage. He planned an escape wrapped in sabotage. Powder fuses timed to ignite just before dawn when watch rotations thinned. Daenerys discovered the plot by accident, overhearing a whispered argument between Viserys and a red-haired Lyseni quartermaster.
Horror keult in Heergut.
To blow Dragonstone sky-high would murder children, servants, Shireen, maybe even herself. Worse, it would stain her name in fire before Westeros ever glimpsed a single dragon banner. She confronted Viserys beneath the Sea Dragon Tower's winding stair. Moonlight glinted on his drawn blade. Treason? He spat, eyes wild. Treason is to kneel beneath the stag and HEW dragons to stumps. She begged him to reconsider. They could flee quietly, seek allies in Dorne, raise logos of respect rather than terror. He struck her, a backhand across the cheek that split skin and memory. She tasted blood and understood the line they had crossed. When Viserys turned to descend, Daenerys lunged and wrenched the dragon blade from his grasp. Training with Shireen's wooden sticks translated poorly to steel, but desperation lent speed. The sword clattered away. Viserys shoved her aside and fled into dark passage, screaming orders at his hired men. Lanterns flared down corridors. Stannis' guards collided with Lyseni cell sails. Steel sang. Daenerys stumbled through smoke toward the observatory where the powder kegs waited. A cell sail lit a wick. Orange sparks skittered along oily rope. Daenerys snatched the half-dormant ember and stamped it into the flagstones, scorching slipper and sole. The cell sail drew a dirk. She rammed a fallen spear shaft into his gut. He collapsed, blood-black in torchlight. She heaved powder casks over the balcony into the sea, one by one, arms shaking. Below, waves swallowed the threat. Ser Davos found her retching on knees, smoke-caked. They secured the tower. 30 cell sails died. 5 guards. Viserys, cornered near the rookery, leapt from a parapet into raging surf, shrieking curses. His body vanished, shards of purple between black waves. In the aftermath, Stannis confronted Daenerys in the stone drum solar. Tension crackled between them like storm lightning poised on steel. She expected accusation, perhaps imprisonment, execution, but Stannis' stare held something like reluctant respect. "You spared my daughter," he said simply. "You spared my men, and you delivered Dragonstone from treachery born within. I owe you a debt." She swallowed. "I ask only freedom to choose my path." Stannis' lips twitched. Whether amusement or annoyance she could not tell. "Your brother would have burned the kingdom to warm his feet. You," he studied her, "you doused the fire. Remember that when the realm one day weighs dragon against stag." He gave her leave to arrange a small retinue, to sail when the storms calmed. Until then she was free of confinement and free of suspicion. In place of chains, she received keys. Access to the island's armories, to its smithy, to the hidden rookery where glass candles sat cold on black pedestals. She took none lightly. That night, in her chamber's quiet, she laid out her 3 stone eggs atop a velvet runner. Red as ember, cream speckled with gold, black streaked with green. She touched each in turn, whispering names she conjured from half-remembered Valyrian. Flames danced in the brazier, and for an instant, she thought the red shell glowed from within, faint as a heart beneath ribs. Winter's fingertips splayed across Westeros. Ravens carried rumors. King Robert's hunts grew longer and drunker. Eddard Stark's leave from court extended. Whispers of Lannister debts mounting in the capital. From Castle Black, Jeor Mormont sent letters south pleading for attention to sightings of revenant corpses. Few listened. Jon Snow led ranging parties in his uncle's stead, pushing through hoarfrost forests to locate evidence. They found Benjen's horse dead, carcass untouched by scavengers. They found tracks that vanished into drifts. They found silence. Jon poured grief into the sword, drilling tirelessly until muscles screamed. Samwell Tarly, his unlikely friend, worried after him. PYP cracked jokes to coax smiles. Gren sparred rough as a bear. Ghost shadowed Jon like a fragment of moonlit intent. Still, each night Jon sealed himself behind the commander's unused desk, writing. One evening, as snow hissed against the shuttered window, Jon inked. The wall stands, but cracks form in men's faith. Cannot mend them alone. I keep your wolf close. He guards my dreams. Burn bright, my lady. Choose tide, choose flame, choose life. G. Ravens battled headwinds to reach Dragonstone. Daenerys read his words by firelight, and her decision crystallized like salt from boiling brine. She would harness the debt Stannis owed, claim a single ship, sleek, swift, and sail for Eastwatch, not King's Landing nor Pentos. She would see winter wolves with her own eyes, would stand where Jon stood, would witness the wall that hemmed monsters. Stannis's master of ships protested. Storms, ice flows, raiders. Daenerys listened, thanked him, and kept her resolve. Ser Davos volunteered to captain. His smuggler bones read waves like scripture. Shireen wept but gifted Daenerys a map inked by her own careful hand. Hidden coves along the gift, tributaries feeding the shivering sea. Stannis approved with a nod, only a nod, but within that nod she heard endorsement and warning both. They provisioned the Black Betha. Oak-ribbed, sail dyed deep indigo so it could melt into pre-dawn horizon. Cargo included casks of fresh water, dried seaweed rations, crossbows, and, packed beneath Daenerys's bed, 3 dragon eggs swaddled in wool. A frigid dawn saw them cast off. Dragonstone's spires receded into mist. Daenerys stood at the prow, hair streaming silver against the gray. She thought of Viserys, whether drowned or clinging to driftwood hatred, and felt sorrow tumbled with relief. His death or disappearance left her the last blood of the dragon, but also freed her from the fire of his ambitions. Now she navigated by her own stars. The voyage clawed north along the narrow sea's biting edge. Icebergs the size of keeps loomed, pale cyan beneath overcast skies. Frost rimed the rigging. Sailors cursed, breath smoking. Davos guided them through shoals only he seemed able to scent. Twice they raised black sails to evade ironborn raiders prowling for late-season plunder. Once a storm hammered them so fiercely Daenerys feared the deck would split. She lashed herself to a stanchion and whispered old Valyrian prayers that tasted of ash and hope. On the 18th day, Eastwatch's watchtower speared above fog like a broken finger pointing at memory. Black Betha dropped anchor beyond the breakwater. Trumpets blared across frozen surf. Rangers rode out, cloaks whipping. The sight of a silver-haired woman at the prow drew more than wind-burnt stares. Jon Snow strode the dock before the gangway had settled. His black cloak snapped like a banner, eyes wide as the shivering sea. They reached for each other, rank and protocol be damned, and hands clasped across the narrowing gap. Daenerys stepped onto creaking planks. The world tilted, not from seasickness but from the collision of paths meticulously severed by fate now mended by choice. Neither spoke at first. Snowflakes dusted her eyelashes. His breath clouded between them. Finally Jon said, "You came." She answered, "I choose every tide," and smiled. Ghost padded forward, nose twitching. He sniffed her glove, then accepted her touch upon his snowy head. Rangers muttered awe. Ser Davos bowed from the gangplank. Jon greeted him with the respect due to a hero of Blackwater told only in rumor this far north. Inside Eastwatch's stone hall, firelight softened edges. Jeor Mormont, summoned by Raven, arrived on a winded horse 2 days later, eyebrows disappearing into gray hairline at the sight of a Targaryen sipping broth near his hearth. Yet the old bear listened as Jon spoke of unity beyond bastardy and birthright, as Daenerys recounted White Walker legends preserved in Valyrian codices, as Ser Davos, leaning on scars, vouched for debt and honor. They drew maps upon the table. The wall's 3 castles, the haunted forest, Hardhome's ghost port. They tallied weaknesses. Dwindling men, wet rot in the southern tunnels, too few dragonglass daggers. Daenerys laid a hand upon her pouch of eggs and said, "If dragons wake, their fire could scour the dead. None scoffed, though dispelly. Yef shimmered. Jon guided her along the ramparts. From the wall's summit, the world below seemed a parchment painted in two colors. White for snowfields, black for forests stripped of life. The horizon hummed with threat Jon felt more than saw. Daenerys pressed gloved fingers to ice older than kingdoms and whispered, "It feels alive. It remembers," Jon replied. "Wind sings memories across the ice." They spoke of Viserys, of Benjen. They spoke of fear, hers of fire uncontrolled, his of night unending. They spoke of small joys. Arya's needlework with a sword called Needle, Shireen's laugh whenever a seagull stole bread, Sam's terror of heights, Davos's fondness for onions. In those sharings, they stitched a quilt warm enough to stand winter's first howl. Days bled into strategy. Rangers fletched arrows tipped with dragonglass mined decades earlier near the shore. Eastwatch's forge hammered iron stakes. Daenerys dwindled sleep to study Maester Aemon's records. Glimpses of wildfire caches left untouched since Aegon IV, of Valyrian steel swords rumored lost north of the Shadow Tower. She felt heat stir within the red egg nightly, pulsing faint as heartbeat. She began placing it within coals. Whispering ancient words gleamed from fractured scrolls. Fire kissed scales, but the shell remained stubbornly silent. One midnight Jon found her in the smithy, sweat purling along her brow despite freezing drafts. The red egg sat atop the anvil, glowing faint. She'd arranged a ring of torches and recited phrases in trembling Valyrian. Jon stepped inside the circle, laid Longclaw's cold blade across the anvil's edge, and added his voice. The old tongue of the first men, an oath to stand shield against night. Flames leapt, the egg brightened, veins crawling fiery light. For a heartbeat, cracks spidered like lightning across its shell. Heat whooshed outward, singing Jon's beard tips. Daenerys's hair billowed halo bright. Then the glow subsided. Shell held fast. They sank atop cold stone, breath ragged. Jon cupped her soot-smudged cheek. "It is not failure," he murmured. "Perhaps the flame waits for winter's heart." She touched his gloved hand. "Or for a different song." Snow slammed Eastwatch at dawn, a blizzard that erased horizon and swallowed torches whole. Patrol horns wailed. Wildling refugees approached, ragged, half-frozen, bearing tales of shadows that moved like men made of ice, of wolves the size of houses with eyes of blue glass. Among them staggering into sight, Benjen Stark, gaunt, eyes fever-bright, cloak rimed in frost. Jon leapt from the rampart ladder before it fully settled. He caught Benjen as knees buckled. "They come," Benjen rasped, voice shredded by cold. "Dead things, night leads them." Maester swarmed, but Benjen clutched Jon's tunic. "Listen," he insisted. "Bridge of ice across the gorge. They cross at first full moon. Hardhome lost. Need fire. Need something more." His gaze drifted to Daenerys comforting a frostbitten child nearby. Recognition flickered. He managed a nod. "Dragon blood," he breathed, then slipped into unconsciousness. Chaos bloomed. Mormont convened officers. Maps unfurled. Full moon lay 12 nights hence. Eastwatch must hold, or the dead would flank the wall by sea and ice both. Supplies thin, archers fewer. They needed allies, wildlings, southern lords, dragons. Dragons they did not yet have. Daenerys returned to the forge that night alone. She built a cradle of coal, laid all 3 eggs within, and lit a fire so hot the iron walls wept liquid. She stepped inside, unafraid. Flames licked gown into tatters, yet heat caressed her skin like summer wind. She spoke to the eggs of love, of duty, of choice. She spoke of wolves in winter, of a man whose honor burned brighter than any crown, of a world worth saving even if it never bowed to her. Tears sizzled upon her cheeks. Outside, Jon burst through the forge doors as a thunderclap split sky. A column of wildfire roared upward, swirling red, gold, green. He cried her name over the fury. Heat blasted him backward. Snow hissed to steam. Silence fell. The forge's roof had peeled open like a blackened flower. Inside, coals glowed but no longer burned. Daenerys knelt, unharmed, naked save for ash like war paint upon her skin, hair cascading silver. In her arms writhed 3 hatchlings, one red as forge heart, one cream speckled gold, one midnight with emerald blaze along its spine. They keened, smoke curling from nostrils. She looked at Jon. Between them pulsed a bond hot as dragon fire, cold as northern ice. Jon sank to his knees. Around them rumbled the distant roar of something ancient waking. The storm above Eastwatch hesitated, as though fearful of what now breathed within its gale. Morning found the castle alive with awe. Rangers gathered. Some knelt, some merely stared. The hatchlings clung to Daenerys' shoulders, claws pricking gently. Mormont bowed curt respect. "A weapon the dead cannot match," he said, voice thick. Yet Daenerys raised a hand. "Not weapons, children. Treat them so and they will defend us. Abuse them, and fire will not discern foe from fool." Plans shifted. They would fly reconnaissance above the gorge. Ice claws could be melted by sustained flame, but hatchlings must grow. 12 nights to full moon, too little. Still, a single pass of dragonfire might shatter the ice bridge enough to buy months. Jon volunteered to ride with Daenerys, ghost in sky above ice.
Mormon boat, no saddles, barely tammed.
Jon replied simply, "We cannot shield the realms of men from the dining hall." His gaze met Daenerys's. She understood. They spent every daylight hour training. Daenerys coaxing Draconys, the red, into short glides from parapet to courtyard. Jon guiding frostbitten horses under torch obstacle courses to accustom them to flame. Night, they pored over charts, planning flight paths low enough to scorch ice yet high enough to evade spears thrown by undead giants. Sam unearthed a Valyrian account of early dragon harnesses. Leather saddles laced with chainmail mesh, spurs that tapped scale without drawing blood. Blacksmiths worked through nights, forging crude approximations sized for hatchling shoulders. On the 7th day, the storm broke into brittle blue sky. Ice glittered. Draconys spread wings broader than a warhorse is long, muscles rippling beneath emberscale. Daenerys secured the harness, mounted. The young dragon lifted with a scream that rattled ramparts. Clawed snowless sky, banked over the sea. Jon watched, heart hammering as if matching wing beats. When she landed, flushed with triumph, she beckoned him. He climbed behind her, arms encircling her waist. Liftoff felt like the world dropping away. Cold wind tore tears from his eyes. Laughter ripped free from Daenerys' throat, wild as wolf howl. Below, the wall shrank to a line of bone white against the dark forest. Ahead, the gorge yawned, a spine of ice bridging chasm, wide enough for armies. Shadows moved upon it, small from height, but Jon knew their menace.
Draconis dove.
Flame roared, liquid sunrise splashing over blue glass. Ice exploded, chunks tumbling into abyss, cracks spidering. Undead shapes toppled, limbs flailing. The hatchling screamed triumph. She veered upward before frost-lace spears could reach. Back at Eastwatch, commanders cheered. Yet Daenerys dismounted with trembling legs. Draconys' flame drained her. The bond shared energy. Maester Aemon warned of mortal limits. But hope crisped the air. Full moon rose, massive and bone-white. Night lit with unnatural blue glints. Jon, atop the wall with dragonglass blade, watched the shattered gorge. Still scarred, though ice attempted to knit. Movement stirred in distant woods. The army of the dead, detouring, seeking another route. Willful intelligence guided them. Inside Eastwatch's tower, Daenerys nursed the hatchlings, each half again their size from first flight, bellies warm from fish and goat. She spoke softly of the battle to come, of a destiny unforeseen. Jon entered. The dragons watched him, eyes like living jewels. Draconys exhaled a puff of smoke that drifted toward Jon, touched Ghost's fur. The direwolf sneezed, shook his head, then licked ember sparks from the air, unhurt. Daenerys laughed. A small, tired sound turned bright. Jon smiled. Then seriousness retook his features. "Ravens from Winterfell," he said. "Robb rides south. King Robert is dead, Daenerys's breath caught, and Lord Eddard stands accused of treason by Queen Cersei.
Va briefs.
He clenched parchment. Winter is not the only enemy. Silence stretched. Outside, the wall groaned beneath wind. Daenerys rose, dragonlings shifting. Then our path forks. If we fight ice, fire rises unchecked behind. If we fight south, the night claims the north. Unless, Jon said slowly, we bind the realms, show them threat greater than thrones. She brushed lips against his forehead. Together, she whispered. Snow drifted through the window. Fire crackled in brazier. A wolf and 3 dragons watched 2 figures decide the turning of an age, choice once more hanging in balance. The distant woods echoed with a horn blast, 3 long notes. White walkers. Jon drew Longclaw. Daenerys lifted Draconys onto her arm. They walked into snowlight side by side, past their brothers, past fear, into legend. The night wheeled overhead, spangled with frozen stars. Beneath, on ice and frost and ancient stone, a song older than kingdoms took new breath. Winter's howl, dragons roar, and the fierce, fragile hearts of 2 who dared rewrite fate by the simple, perilous act of choosing. The full dark of a northern midnight gathered around Eastwatch like a closed fist. Lanterns burned low along the ramparts, their flames buffeted by gusts that tasted of stone dust and something older, an iron tang of secrets grinding awake beneath the ice. Jon Snow stood on the southern parapet, long claw sheathed, while cloak pressed tight by the gale, listening to the steady creak of wood and the unsettled heartbeat of a castle poised between tides. Behind him, in a chamber barely larger than a stable stall, Daenerys rested against a thick fur draped across the floor, her dragons curled about her legs like living bracelets of heat and scale. Draconys, already the length of her thigh, occasionally twitched a wing, releasing an ember that flickered violet before winking out. Viserion, cream and gold, dreamed with jaws half open, teeth reflecting the hearth. Rhaegon, midnight hatchling, slept wrapped around her ankle, tail beating a slow drum against her boot. Jon's mind flicked between 2 horizons. North, the great unseen host shifting beyond the eaves of the haunted forest, white walkers shepherding corpses whose hollow eyes glittered blue beneath moonlit overcast. South, King's Landing aflame with Lannister intrigue, the realm fracturing along fault lines first carved by ancient Valyrians and widened by Robert Baratheon's indolence. Somewhere in the rifts, Ned Stark's honor was crucified. Yet the ravens that soared between Winterfell and the Wall carried more urgent warnings. Robb raising banners in haste, Catelyn riding east to treat with riverlords, Tywin Lannister mustering war columns in the Green Fork's shadow. The war of men howled like a jealous wolf outside the keep, demanding attention even as a greater predator approached. He turned from the parapet to the chamber. Daenerys tilted her head back against the fur, observing him with eyes that caught firelight and turned it to molten amethyst. Bruises of fatigue ringed both their gazes. The forge-born adrenaline of hatching had waned, replaced by practical terrors. Feed, shelter, training, and the weight of decisions whose ripples would crash upon continents. Every step outward from that first choice, sailing north, seemed to birth 10 fresh crossroads. She rose silently, disturbing only Viserion, who chirped and scaled her traveling cloak to perch upon her shoulder. Jon offered a hand as she stepped over Rhaegon. Heat radiated through his glove even though the hatchling barely weighed the heft of a newborn pup. They crossed the corridor to Mormont's war room. The old bear stood hunched over a frost-rimmed table, stiff as basalt. Wisps of steam escaped his beard with each breath. Maester Aemon sat nearby, wrapped in layers of sable, fingers exploring braille maps traced in wax thread. Ser Davos leaned against a barrel of salted cod, arms folded, staring at a pair of well-worn dice. Tempted, Jon suspected, to gamble outcome on fortune rather than thin plans. Mormont acknowledged their entrance with a grunt. Benjen woke briefly, he rasped, said the dead build sledges of bone, dragging siege timber from the forest. Reinforced spears of pale ice, strong enough to shatter stone. He jabbed a gauntlet finger at crude sketches. sweeping arcs showing possible routes to skirt their shattered gorge. They'll avoid the ruins of Hardhome. We think the dragon's smoke unsettled them, but that leaves 2 passes farther west. Neither is watchable by Eastwatch's men alone. Shadow Tower and Castle Black can spare no more. Jon studied the map's ridgelines, valley mouths, and dotted marshland. "Where are the wildling scouts?" he asked. "Scattered," Davos answered. Tormund Giantsbane rallied a few hundred survivors 2 days south of Frostfangs. "They'd fight with us, but they won't reach either pass before moonfall." Tension knitted across knucklebones and parchment. Maester Aemon's voice, fragile as blown glass, rose. "Then we hold with what we have. Fire, steel, faith, and dragons," Mormont finished. He looked at Daenerys, awe cloaked in practicality. "How many passes can those little beasts cover?" Her gaze dropped to the hatchlings, who preened under attention. "They tire quickly. 2 short flights each night, maybe 3 if pushed. Draconys recovers fastest." She met Jon's eyes as though for permission to speak deeper. He gave a near-invisible nod. "But there is an old method among my ancestors. Valyrians trained young dragons by tethering them to earth with thick iron rings, forcing them to circle a target in patterns until instinct melded with command. Repetition built stamina. We have no such rings. Yet perhaps—" Her voice faded beneath the collective hum of possibilities. Jon caught the thread. "We could adapt ballista rigging, spool thick hawser from the mast of Black Betha, stake it in the courtyard, have each dragon circle while she issues commands." Davos's brow lifted. "Risky, but workable, so long as nobody stands beneath the path of their droppings." A faint smile cracked the gloom. Plans took shape. Forge crew crafting harness couplers, rangers repurposing anchor line, maesters mixing feed mash rich with seal fat and powdered dragonglass shards said to toughen scale. Jon volunteered for each demonstration flight, acting as ground anchor, gauntlets protected by boiled leather. He would take burns, yes, but fewer than losing an arm to stray talons should a dragon break tether. Training consumed 3 feverish days. Snow hammered Eastwatch without rest. Still, the courtyard pulsed with shouted commands, creaking winches, and the screech of dragon wings slicing sleet. Draconys learned fastest. Titan Circle on Karak, Rise Steep on Varric, Loose Flame on Dracarys. The other 2 followed slower but steady, coaxed by Daenerys' firm hand and sweet low Valyrian lullabies when exhaustion drooped wings. Jon bore blister trails across his forearms from rope friction. Maester Aemon salved them nightly with herbs that smelled of pine pitch and vinegar. Word stole south along the King's Road like wildfire in wheat. Dragons hatched, wall allied with Targaryen. Mormont's pigeons ruffled quills, delivering half-believed warnings to Winterfell and Moat Cailin. Robb Stark's host, already marching for Riverrun, quickened pace. Northern barons spoke of ancient oaths binding ice and fire. Riverlords, beleaguered by Lannister incursion, seized the rumor as omen of salvation. Stark direwolves and dragons in league offered a tale for ballads even as soldiers bled. Inside the Red Keep, Queen Cersei's spies whispered of a silver-haired witch-conjuring beasts beyond the wall. The Hand's seat sat empty, Ned Stark imprisoned, and Joffrey's crown weighed heavier each dawn. Days before the full moon, Benjen Stark staggered into the courtyard under his own power, leaning on a rough ash staff. Frostrime etched his eyebrows, his left ear blackened beyond saving. Yet within his gaze burned clarity regained. He summoned Jon and Daenerys to the Rookery Tower, away from curious ears. "The Night King rides with 4 lieutenants," he croaked. "I saw them at Dead Man's Gap, preparing a ritual. They wear armor of ice that drinks moonlight, weapons forged of eternal winter. But there's something else." He drew a shaking breath. "They fear dragonfire, yes, yet they fear dragon glass more." A shard lodged within one lieutenant's skull cracked him like spun sugar, broke the glamour that binds dead to will. The ice bridge shattered easily thereafter. Jon leaned forward. "We have drifts of dragonglass only in crates. How do we deliver enough shards across an army?" Benjen fixed his nephew. "We don't. We deliver one, into the Night King himself. His staff struck stone for emphasis. Cut the head. The body falls. Daenerys's pulse hammered. I have a dagger of dragonglass. It could be lashed to Draconis's harness tip. Too small, Benjen said. You need spear length. Something that can pierce armor before flame can melt it. Jon's mind raced through smithy inventory. Broken pike shafts, anchor claws, chains. Then memory struck. Longclaw's pommel swap months earlier left the old bearhead aft cap stowed in spare parts. Steel threaded with Valyrian runes, hollow enough to seat a core of dragonglass. A spear, then hammered by blacksmiths, tip sheathed in that cap, secured by pitch and rawhide. Combine fire with a single targeted strike. They might snap Destiny's spine. Mormont sanctioned the work. Apprentices hammered through 2 sunrises, hammering anchor steel flat over charcoal. Samwell, sweating through wool layers, read aloud from scrolls on ancient Valyrian adhesives to bond glass and iron. By dusk of the 3rd day, a 12-foot spear gleamed black, its tip midnight blue glass veined by copper lines. Jon hefted it, felt balance sing. Full moon climbed. Night air lay brittle, pressed so thin one could almost see stars twinkling through cracks in the dark. Clarion horns wailed thrice. The dead came. Jon watched from atop the east tower. A white sea cresting hillocks, tens of thousands of corpses, wildlings, rangers, giants, even gaunt elk. Ridden forward by 4 tall figures whose crowns of ice flickered between shapes, as though glimpsed through water. At their center rode the Night King upon a mount half-skeletal, half-blackened by old flame, frost coiling from nostrils. Daenerys, clad in quilted leather dyed charcoal, climbed to Draconis's back. The dragon, now with a wingspan near 10 paces, pawed at rampart stone, eager. Viserion and Rhaegon perched behind in iron cages. They would guard Eastwatch but were not yet ready for battle flight. Rangers lined the wall with barrels of pitch-soaked arrows. Maester Aemon prayed in words older than castles. Mormont moved among men, muttering courage. Jon stepped up behind Daenerys, dragonglass spear slung across his back. Their eyes met. Words proved unnecessary. He looped harness straps, secured himself at her waist. Ghost barked below, a single sharp note. Then Draconis leapt. Claws raked ice as the dragon sprang high, wings snapping open like banners unfurled. Wind punched Jon's lungs. Cold tears stung. They banked toward the shining host, spanning black sky like raven wings before storm. Below, volleys of flaming arrows lit, streaked downward, exploding in scarlet flares across undead ranks. Flesh dried to parchment ignited, but many trudged on unfeeling. Daenerys whispered Dracarys. Draconis inhaled. Furnace glow leaked from throat. Flame jetted, a river of sunrise lashing across the dead's foremost wedge. Ice-armored whites melted, giant bones cracked to steam, yet new ranks stepped over charred remains. They ascended out of spear range. Jon gauged distance. Night King a mote of pale sapphire among shifting whites. They needed closer. Daenerys angled down again, weaving through updrafts. Frost crystals haloed her hair. They skirted along the host's flank, scorching lateral lines, chiseling an opening through which wildling berserkers and Night's Watch rangers charged, blades of feud-forged steel ringing. But Jon's focus tunneled onto that crowned figure. He felt chill worm beneath wool though dragonfire brimmed overhead. 2 lieutenants gestured. Shards of translucent ice spun from their palms, coalescing into spears. They hurled upward. One whistled past Draconis's hind leg, slicing a foot-long gash. Crimson spattered wind. The dragon shrieked, tilting. Jon held tight as the world rotated crazily. Daenerys hissed calming syllables, guiding wings steady. They circled wider, regaining altitude before plunging again. Mormont's trebuchets launched clay pots of wildfire salvaged from ancient depots. Green explosions painted night-hide illumination. Skeletal patterns writhed in emerald flame, whites turning mirror-bright before collapsing. Yet still the Night King rode. Now, Jon shouted over Gale. Daenerys banked sharply, angled toward the commander. Sleet formed sudden whirlwinds as the Night King raised a hand. A wall of frigid air slammed Draconys. Wings faltered. Frost bloomed across membrane like flowering glass. The dragon roared in pain, flapping madly, losing speed. Jon's pulse thundered. If they stalled, they would crash into a forest of ice pikes hoisted by undead thralls. Daenerys drew on some inner reservoir, a reservoir birthed in fire on Dragonstone's forge floor. She leaned forward, pressed palms to scale, closed eyes, and sang in pure Valyrian. Half lullaby, half command. A glowing red vein rippled along Draconys' throat. Frost cracked free, shattering like crystal bells. Momentum returned in a brutal snap. They tore forward, ground rising fast. Jon slid the spear from its sling, wetting the dragonglass tip with his breath, as though life warmth might feed its hunger. Daenerys aimed the dive so the Night King centered in their path. No other whites obstructed. Their own commander's aura parted ranks like tide. At 30 paces, the Night King looked up. That face, gaunt, chiseled, eyes bluer than brushing dawn, registered something akin to curiosity. He lifted a sword of pale ice, beginning to gather swirling white vortices about its blade. A shieldless stance, but weapon held high. Jon braced, spear couched beneath arm as though mounted cavalry. Draconys screamed flame that washed over the Night King's body. The ice sword glowed red, then burst, but its master endured within a vortex of blizzard swirling so dense the fire diverted around him. A heartbeat later, spear point struck. Dragonglass met chest of frozen mail. For an instant both seemed to hold. Then the spear drove through, cleaving pale ribs. The Night King's eyes widened, not with pain, but with recognition, as cracking lines spider-webbed outward. Jon felt a detonation like thunder inside his bones. White light flared. Shock wave hurled Draconys sideways, flinging Jon free. He tumbled through air, stars spinning, spear shattering against some unseen force. Yet gusts caused by the explosion also swept him upward rather than groundward. He glimpsed the Night King collapse into shards that melted even as they fell. The host below lurched, thousands of corpses pausing mid-stride as if strings severed. Jon's next vision was blinding white snow rushing up to meet him. He braced, impact never came. Talons clamped his shoulders. Draconys, battle-scarred but alive, caught him, wings beating desperate thunder. They climbed high, Jon dangling, pain throbbing along ribs. Below, ranks of undead collapsed like carnival tents in sudden wind. Shattered limbs, corpses twitching, then still. But 2 lieutenants remained. Daenerys swung Draconys to a hover above a broad clearing. Jon scrambled onto back, chest heaving. 1 down, he gasped. 2 to go, she replied. Though fear flickered, dragon's blood smeared her sleeve where gash oozed. Below, lieutenants rallied, pockets of whites still animated. Perhaps distance from the Night King buffered influence. They converged on Eastwatch's outer wall. Trebuchets stalled. Crew stunned by the abrupt victory. Rangers tried to regroup, but confusion reigned. Daenerys eyed the smaller dragons still caged. Releasing them risked uncontrolled havoc, yet leaving them docile wasted resources. She banked toward Eastwatch, shouting for Davos. He sprinted across courtyard, keys jangling. Cages opened, hinges screeching. Viserion and Rhaegon spilled forth, wings beating uncertain rhythm. They followed Draconys like ducklings to dam. A plan forged mid-flight. Draconys would distract lieutenants with flame strafes while Jon landed near rampart crenels to seize arrows tipped in dragonglass. Viserion and Rhaegon, though weaker, could harry flanks, scattering residual whites and giving rangers breathing room. The tactic played like dice across a table, unpredictable yet, by fortune, rolling in their favor. Draconys' searing arcs forced 1 lieutenant to raise ice barriers. Cracks formed, weakening armor. Jon, perched on parapet, loosed a dragonglass shaft that Sam had insisted be arrow-length yet spear-thick. It smashed into lieutenant's thigh, shattered. The figure buckled, aura flickering. A second shaft landed in clavicle. The lieutenant convulsed, then burst into frost dust, ice barriers collapsing. The final lieutenant retreated, raising winds so fierce they flung Viserion into tower masonry. Daenerys roared wordless challenge, guiding Draconys into a vertical ascent before power diving. Jon plucked a last obsidian arrow, knocked, breathed. Dive velocity shrieked in his ears, wind tears, memory of Bran's laughter sledding across Winterfell's hills. He released. The arrow struck center chest. Silence. No burst. Instead, a hairline crack meandered outward, glowing azure. Lieutenant raised arms. Ice needle shards shot upward. One grazed Jon's left cheek, slice cold as void. Flame from Draconys engulfed all. Within conflagration, the crack widened, shattering bones. Lieutenant fell, melted before ground. The battlefield hushed. Whites nearest toppled. Others deeper in tree lines staggered, continued aimless, drooped. Soon none moved. Snow drifted over inert forms. Dead silence grew until wind reclaimed forest size. Dawn edged sky pink-gray. Eastwatch's gateyard overflowed with survivors. Wildlings sobbing thanks. Rangers cheering limp-arm triumph. Maesters tending burns. Jeor Mormont hobbled to the parapet, surveyor's eyes wet. "7 preserve us, you did it," he murmured, then louder shouted for silence. Men and women, giant and child, bowed heads as he declared the Night King destroyed, army broken, dawn reclaimed. Yet Jon watched Daenerys cradle Draconys' injured leg, heart heavy. Victory bore cost. The dragon's wound wept blood both crimson and luminous orange where flame glands intersected flesh. Maester Aemon prepared salves of myrrh and powdered glass. Daenerys whispered comfort, singing until eyelids drooped. 2 nights later, Benjen called council in the rebuilt mess hall. Fire blazed in 4 hearths. Walls draped with black banners stitched in silver direwolves and crimson dragons crossing, the first of their kind. Rangers, wildling chieftains, maesters, Davos, Mormont, and Daenerys' slender cadre of sailors gathered around long tables. Pipes of steam rose from peat moss tea mugs. Silence settled as Jon and Daenerys entered arm in arm. Benjen rose, leaning without staff today. The dead are vanquished, yet north of the wall will still harbor pockets. Rangers will sweep, burn remains, ensure no shards revive. But we stand at a new precipice. South of the wall, war rages. If we return to our keeps, Winterfell may fall. The realm fracture into kingdoms too weak to stand united. I say we carry this victory south. Show banners merged. Prove that old grudges can be mended. Murmurs. Wildlings, historically at odds with southern laws, eyed each other warily. One named Ygritte stepped forward, hair orange like campfire. If crows march south, free folk come too. Not to kneel, mind, but to make sure your lords remember we bled in your snow. Mormont grunted approval. Ser Davos tapped knuckles on table. Then we sail, he said. Black Betha can bear news to White Harbor. Stannis' older Carrick, Fury's Wake, sits idle in Dragonstone's east slip, could meet us halfway. Suppose we gather our wounded, load dragons for warmer climes. Daenerys shook her head. Dragons remain until Rhaegon and Viserion learn sky as Draconys has. I will not risk them in naval holds. We fly south across dawn skies. The realm must see with its own eyes. Plans unfolded like wool rolled across floorboards. Scouts would ride ahead to Winterfell. Ravens would carry proof of the Night King's fall. A shard of his crown, sealed in iron, plus testimony of sworn maesters. Jon's heart twisted at thought of returning home, not as bastard but as slayer of winter monsters. Yet heavier still was the knowledge of Ned Stark's peril. Each hour mattered. 3 days of repair and burial ensued. Pyres burned high. Daenerys walked the ramparts each dusk, dragons perched, eyes yellow and gloaming. She and Jon spoke of next battles, of securing Winterfell, forging alliances with riverlords, of confronting Lannister iron. She confessed fear that war for the throne would swallow their fragile coalition. Jon, ever the pragmatist, pressed her hand. Your dragons will awe, but hearts change slower than snowdrifts melt. We must present more than fire. We present mercy. She studied him, mercy tempered by justice. Aye, the realm has bled from rulers who wielded only one blade. On the morning of departure, Castle Black's remaining rangers arrived. Dolorous Ed with uncharacteristic grin, Corrin Halfhand nursing cracked ribs yet refusing stretcher. They saluted Daenerys as queen in practice if not title. Sam wept unabashedly as he saddled a mule loaded with scrolls. They would ride to Old Town, requesting Citadel recognition of the dragons. Eastwatch's gates yawned. Jon stood beside Draconys' braced foreleg, spear recut into banner pole bearing emblem newly stitched by Alice Karstark. Direwolf rampant entwined with dragon, halves overlapping. He mounted behind Daenerys, felt heat pulse through cloak. She glanced back. Wind teased silver hair across his brow. They rose on thermal updraft, castle shrinking. Below, columns formed, wildlings and rangers, horses and mammoths alike, banners of black and red. Pipes skirled. Horns echoed along sea cliffs. Ahead, mainland beckoned. First the ragged edge of the Gift, then the shivering sea's coastal road. Clouds parted, revealing a ribbon of dawn gilding far peaks rose gold. Draconys leveled at a steady altitude. Viserion and Rhaegon flanked, wings still wobbling but determined. Jon breathed crisp air washed clean by victory and grief alike. Daenerys pointed southward. Winterfell lies there. All our roads converge. He covered her hand with his. And beyond, perhaps, a throne forged anew. Not forged, she corrected softly. Melted and reforged. Fire old curves until they bend to righteous shapes. They flew hours, following trunk of King's Road visible faintly below where thaw had begun its slow crawl north. In midday haze they sighted smoke curling from hearths of Carhold watchposts. Signals relayed a dragon approach but eventually slumped into calm once watchmen recognized banners. By twilight they touched down at a clearing ringed by frosted spruce, shelter for night. Tents raised, dragons fed on venison. Jon and Daenerys shared stew, silence comfortable. She traced scar across his cheek earned from ice shard. He brushed a braid behind her ear. "Do you believe?" she asked, voice low. "A dragon and a wolf may share the same den?" "I believe," he answered. "The den shapes to fit those who build it." Snow fell gentle overnight, dusting dragon wings while they slept. Morning dawned quiet until distant hoofbeats churned hush. A lone rider burst from tree line, northern scout, face raw from hard gallop. He knelt. Robb Stark commands immediate return. Riverrun besieged. King in the north he called himself, lords declared for him. They begged dragons and the bastards soared. Jon's stomach turned. Riverrun under siege already? Aye, Tywin's host camped along the Red Fork in force. The phrase turned cloaks. His gaze flicked to Daenerys, uneasy. Daenerys rose, spine straight. "Then we speed our wings. Dragons break siege quickly, but only if they soar above allied hearts. Let us hope Riverlords recognize salvation, not new conqueror." She mounted, Jon following. Flight resumed. By dusk they reached White Harbor, startling fishermen into dropping nets. Wyman Manderly himself, flesh reminiscent of trade-rich barrels, waddled forth to greet them at wharf. He pledged port coffers and grain. News. Robb marched south of the Twins, but supply lines thin. If dragons flew to Riverrun, northern morale would surge, riverlords might rally. That night Jon dined with Manderly in Grand Hall scented of lemon cake and tallow. Daenerys spoke cautiously of uniting houses beyond precedent. Freeing riverlands from siege, then negotiating prisoner exchange to spare small folk. Manderly, ever fond of theatrics, produced a silver mint coin hammered minute earlier. Direwolf on one face, dragon on other, motto, bound in winter's fire. He distributed sacks of them for future trade. Next dawn, Draconys led his siblings over Blue Fork's winding course, soared above sunstruck wheat fields smoldering from pillaged barns. As they neared Riverrun's proud triple walls, columns of smoke stained sky. Lannister siege towers trundled toward drawbridges. Catapults hurled flaming ordnance. Stark direwolf banners fluttered on hillside encampments to north, but numbers looked thinned by attrition. Dragons wheeled overhead like omens. Below, horns shrilled, both armies tilting faces in rapture or dread. Flames avalanched from Draconys, ripping through a siege tower, scattering men like sparks. Lannister lines faltered. Jon brandished bannerstaff, sweeping in arcs signaling Stark allegiance. Cheers erupted from Robb's position. Jon spotted him. Auburn mane, armor dented, sword hoisted, joy shining like dawn. They landed beyond archer range behind Stark ranks. Jon leapt, knees buckling from ride fatigue. Robb crashed into embrace. "Brother, you fly gods themselves." He stared at Daenerys approaching, Viserion perched shoulder. "And who stands by you?" Jon swallowed. "Daenerys Stormborn, blood of the dragon, breaker of the night." Daenerys inclined head with queenly restraint. Robb looked between them, comprehension dawning, fear then respect. "Then our enemies should tremble doubly," he said, and gestured to command tent. Inside, strategy maps scattered. Catelyn Stark rose when Jon entered. Eyes widened but softened, seeing dragons beyond canvas. She embraced him, tears smudging ash across cheek. No words yet, but acceptance glimmered. Plans redrawn. Dragons would focus on siege engines threatening Riverrun's main gate while Stark flank charged Tywin's exposed supply train. Robb insisted Jon remain rear for command. Daenerys refused to let him face risk alone. Catelyn saw their bond, tension crossing features reminiscent of lost love reopened. Then, perhaps remembering the night Jon rode for Wall, she set hand on Daenerys' arm. "Guard him," she said simply. Battle erupted under noon sun. Draconys' flame sheared through catapult arms. Viserion darted at horse lines, screeching. Rhaegon sprayed smaller gouts along trenches, igniting pitch stores. Lannister trumpets blared retreat. Tywin's golden armor glinted as he attempted to form rearguard. Suddenly Rhaegon veered, struck by bolt from Scorpion hidden inside hay wagon. The bolt glanced but embedded shallow. Dragon shrieked, spiral crashing into field. Jon, on foot, sprinted under arrow rain to reach him, hacking Lannister pikes. He yanked bolt free. Crimson blood spurted. Dragon licked his palm, eyes swirling emerald and amber. Adrenaline hammered. Tywin, seeing Jon isolated, spurred forward with honor guard. Jon drew Longclaw, met blow of a knight with shield emblazoned lion.
Steel ran.
Tywin advanced to deliver killing thrust. Draconys dropped like thunder behind him, jaws clamping horse's hind, throwing both mount and rider. Flaming breath roared across dry grass. Tywin rolled away, armor blistering. Robb's cavalry smashed through supply lines. Lannister standards toppled. Dusk found their camp burning rubble, prisoners corralled beneath willow copses. Riverrun's portcullis lifted. Edmure Tully greeted his rescuers, wearing shame of failed defense yet gratitude glowing. In the great hall that night, banners of wolf, trout, and dragon hung side by side. Lords watched Daenerys stroke Draconys' snout as he snored by hearth. Whispered debates. Queen of foreign blood, but dragons delivered. Jon sat beside Robb at high table, wine untouched. He pondered father in dungeons far to south, the path curling now toward King's Landing. Later, in quiet solar overlooking the tumblestone, Catelyn found Jon. Torches crackled. "You love her," she observed, voice neither cold nor warm. Jon stiffened. "I stand with the North, mother lady," he corrected. She touched his cheek where ice wound scar faded. "I misjudged you long," she said, gaze shining wet. "Your father, my husband, taught honor, yet I let fear snare me. Tonight I saw you risk life for kin who once spurned you. Forgive me." Tears spilled. Jon, throat thick, pulled her to embrace. Years melted. Behind them, Daenerys entered, soft steps. Catelyn withdrew, offered small bow. "Queen, no titles," Daenerys said. "We are women who bled. Let that suffice." Catelyn's lips quirked. "Then let mothers know peace," she answered before slipping away. Moon arced above ramparts. Jon and Daenerys stood shoulder to shoulder. Below, Dragons slumbered, wings twitching. River shimmered silver. Far to south, red keep lanterns perhaps still burned, though whose banners flew unknown. "We fly for King's Landing next?" Jon asked. Daenerys exhaled. "We fly for justice, not to burn city nor seize throne. We present choice. Heed the North and Dragonstone's call, or face united flame and ice." She looked to him. "But I will not impose rule through terror." "Then we forge something new," Jon said. "A council where dragon and wolf share seat. Add rising stags, proud trout, cautious kraken," she mused. "A tapestry not yet woven." He smiled, weary but hopeful. "Let's weave it." She slipped fingers into his, warmth steady. The night carried scents of smoke and lilac. Somewhere distant, ravens took wing, bearing news that would shatter assumptions like dragonglass through frozen bone. In coming months, armies would clash, thrones would crumble, but beneath it all, a bond born on storm-washed battlements of Dragonstone and tempered atop frozen wall would guide kingdoms toward dawn. Above them, constellations traced circle. The dire wolf followed the dragon across sky's black sea. Patterns older than crowns yet new every night, reminding all who looked up that even heavens rewrote their stories, star by star, choice by choice, until morning found them radiant and reborn.